Wall Street Wrap-Up is supported by Bamboolas, featuring live music and coming soon, tapas and wine upstairs. Bamboolas, the heartbeat of Frenchman Street.
This week on Wall Street Wrap-Up, July's inflation numbers, or CPI, are released by the government. So with the Federal Reserve raising interest rates, how is it, or is it, having an effect on prices? You pay for food, you pay for gas, and for shelter. We'll tell you. Last week, Fitch downgrades the U.S. long-term debt rating of the country. Well, this week, Moody's downgrades many banks. Tonight, we're going to be talking with Peter Raschuti. Peter's a professor of finance at Tulane's Freeman School of Business and the director of Tulane's Burkenroad Reports about the economy, the country's credit ratings, and if he was grading Fed Chair Jay Powell, what grade would he give his handling of the economy? We're going to ask Peter. Peter Raschuti, coming up. I'm Andre Laborde. We've got these stories and more because it's Friday and it's time for Wall Street Wrap-Up. Hi, welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up. It's Friday, August the 11th. Well, this week, the Bureau of Labor Statistics released the information numbers for last month for everything from food to fuel to airline tickets. Now, just to recap, the inflation for June of last year over year was up 3%. But for last month, July, it went up higher to 3.2%. Now remember, inflation, all it is a fancy way of saying your dollar is going far less. Well, the core CPI, or inflation, excluding two volatile areas of food and energy, that went up even higher, rising to just over 4.5%. The Federal Reserve and economists look at the core CPI, taking out those two areas of food and energy. Now, speaking of food, for July, food in general was up almost 5%, but energy and used vehicles was down 12.5% and 5.6%. Though new vehicles was up 3.5% and shelter with rents, well, that escalated to 7.5% year over year. Last month, for the year, gas is down almost 20% from July of 2022. Electricity is up 3%, but fuel oil is down over 26%. And the average cost of a gallon of regular gas nationwide is now at $3.82 a gallon. Now, I know you may be saying, I pay much less or more than that. Well, this is the average. And such as gasoline in California, Oregon, and Washington State today is closer to $6 a gallon. Hikes? No, thank you. Well, from last year, eggs have gone down just over 13.5%. Meat is up almost 2%. Fruits and vegetables, that's up almost 3%. So how did our money do this week? The Dow Jones held positive for the week for United Health, leading the Dow, but Disney, well, they lagged. And energy is the top S&P 500 sector performer, and technology, well, that was the biggest S&P 500 laggard. Top stocks in the S&P were News Corp and eBay. So this week, the Dow Jones closed today at 35,281, which was up 0.6 of a point for the week. S&P 500, they closed today at 4464, down 0.2 of a point for the week. And the NASDAQ, they closed at 13,644, down 1.8% for the week. And this week, Moody's downgrades 10 U.S. banks and warns of possible cuts to other banks because of their exposure to commercial real estate loans. Now, you would think with the stock market is up for the last months that there would be a FOMO or a fear of missing out. But no, a lot of investors are sitting on cash. And by the way, lots of it, over $6.5 trillion sitting in cash, which might even be a record. Stocks heating up for the last 30 days. Number one was energy sector, that oil and gas sector rising over 15%, including then pharmaceuticals up over 8.5% for the month. And in stocks cooling their jets or taking a breather was technology and the triple Qs down over 3%, as well as utilities, that was down 1.5%. So with inflation numbers released this week, rising interest rates, how's the economy doing? Well, with me tonight is finance professor at Tulane's Freeman School of Business and the director of Burkenroad Reports, Peter Raschuti. Hi, Peter. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
Oh, hey, Andre, it's always great to visit with you.
Hey, Peter, you're a professor. If you were grading Jay Powell, chairman of the Federal Reserve, how he's been handling the economy, what kind of grade would you give him?
An A+. In
Okay.
fact, I wouldn't even make him take the final. He has threaded the needle in a way nobody ever thought they could. Everybody thought if you brought down inflation, the economy would collapse. And if you had high inflation, the economy would do very well. But it was a trade-off, and he did it. We actually have inflation. Last June, inflation was 9.1%, and now it's 3.0%. The market's up. It's really kind of amazing how well it's done, and I think the stock market has figured it out. You know, since the beginning of the year, we're up about 20%, and that's usually, if you want to know how things are going, you can talk to newspaper reporters and all that, but the market's telling you how things are going.
We've got, like you said, unemployment is right now at about 3.5%. Inflation right now is about at 3%. Are you able to decrease the inflation without, and I don't want anybody to lose their job or have unemployment, but the thought was that they had to have a labor market that was a higher unemployment rate. Are you able to have the best of both of those worlds?
I think you're doing it right now. It's amazing how they have worked this system, because the job market is red hot. In fact, the economy's almost too hot right now. That's where people worry about maybe another interest rate hike or something like that. But for instance, give you an example. We need 650,000 construction workers right now that we don't have. I mean, this is an amazing economy. And the interesting thing is people don't seem to know about it. You still hear a lot of negative talk on the economy and such. And I don't know what they're looking at. Frankly, it couldn't get much better.
Mm-hmm. How is it, Peter, that like last week we had the jobs report that came out for July, and the participation rate was at 62.6%. And I've always been kind of in a quandary where how is it that about 37% of the participation rate is not participating, but we've got an unemployment rate of about 3.5%. How are this 37% plus people, how are they paying their rent and living?
Well, it's just a weird way to calculate a number. It includes people that are going to school. It includes the impaired, the handicapped. It includes retirees, and that's what so it isn't really a great number, and it's always been around 60-65%. And one of the things is even before COVID, 10,000 baby boomers were retiring every day. And with COVID, a lot of people said, I got a couple of years left, I'll just, pack it in now. So that's really the truth. That number, of all the numbers out there, in a way, that's the worst of all of them.
Mm-hmm. How about, I brought this up, there was a report last week that babies born in the United States have actually decreased from prior. And you're hearing about, as when you watch financial shows and even regular into the news shows, they're talking about AI, artificial intelligence, how it's going to take jobs, and the jobs are going to be used, artificial intelligence is going to be taken away. Are we going to be needing the amount of people in the future or the foreseeable future because of the advent of AI, artificial intelligence?
That's going to be difficult, but your first point was very interesting, that we are at a 37-year low of making babies. So it's something we used to be good at, but it is, and it's really incredible. So one of the things that spurs on is that you need some sort of reasonable immigration policy, which doesn't seem to have any chance of getting through the Congress these days. But you need to do that because we're running out of people. And immigration was always what filled that gap. AI is just a wild card, really, Andre. I have no idea, and I don't think anybody else does, what kinds of jobs are going to be eliminated and just how many of them. So you have a strong economy on one side. You've got changes in technology that may alter the landscape. You're absolutely right.
With inflation, as we were talking about before, there was a report this week that came out that I think it was Bank of America, that $1 trillion are what people have been putting on their credit cards, and there was also, and I think also it was Bank of America, that reported that there are more people today that are taking out of their 401k and for hardship to being able to balance, just as when we go to the grocery to find the cost of a dozen eggs for inflation. Do you see that with the future the way it's going, that we're going to be having to have more people that are having problems as this?
Well, one thing we've seen is a big split in whether you want to call it wealth inequality or economic opportunity inequality. That's really our issue, because so many of us are doing very well, probably better than we ever have, but there's people that have really been left out of this, and that's the folks you're starting to see, whether it's the credit cards or it's the retirement funds. And that eventually leads to problems in an economy, is when you have that big a split. One thing I would say, though, is that we're not nearly as leveraged as we were in 08, 09, which is what everybody wanted to compare things to. Back then, people, average person owned 3 homes and things like that. We're just not seeing that kind of spending.
Peter, I'm glad you brought that up about the wealth inequality. I remember, and I'm going back a couple of years, but you wrote a piece in Forbes magazine, and if I remember correctly, it was luxury goods. Now, not Hermes bags or Louis Vuitton, but the point of the piece was of the local Louisiana boat builders of just pleasure boats. But I remember at the end of the article, you had, and if my numbers were correct, because it's been a while, but you said at one time, the top 1% wage earners had 10% in equities and stocks. Today, that top 1% is like 40%, where there's a big gap and the middle class is kind of left out. Now, I admit, this was a couple of years ago when you wrote that piece, but I'm curious, do you think now with 401ks and IRAs and, when you ask somebody, do you own stocks, they may say no, but you go, do you have a mutual fund? Oh, yeah, I got a mutual fund, but they don't know. I mean, do you think, when you wrote that article, as compared to what it is today and that middle class, where do you see it?
Well, about 40% of all wealth in the United States is in the top 10%. So that's a very tenuous position,
Well, this past week, I think it was Fitch that downgraded the long-term debt of the United States, and it went from a AAA to a AA plus. Now, some people go, well, it's still a AA plus, but I'm curious of when a downgrade occurs, that means that it costs more for treasuries. Right. It costs more when people buy bonds, and that'll also mean the cost. How do you see the downgrading of Fitch? Do you think that may also then start, maybe Moody's and others may also start having a second look at the economy, at the credit worthiness of the country?
It could, but it really didn't mean anything, to be honest with you. Rates didn't really go up on treasuries. I think it's kind of ridiculous, really. But yet you had it. And one thing they said, though, one thing Fitch has said, which is absolutely true, is we can no longer have this annual circus about the budget and whether or not we can print more money. It has to be done like real adults, and that's what's not happening. Every year it's grandstanding. Nobody can get together until the last hour, and that was one of the things Fitch mentioned.
Jamie Dimon, who's the CEO of Chase, of J.P. Morgan Chase, he brought up after all this was over with, and along with Fitch, he said that the debt ceiling should be taken off the table. They should not have it anymore. But I'm wondering, is that when you tell Congress, and you worked in the state government, and I'm wondering, you've talked to quite a bit of the federal government, you tell politicians that there's no debt ceiling, that you won't have to argue. I mean, is that sort of like putting a bottle of alcohol in front of a table with, people who have drinking problems and go, I want this back after 2 days, but don't touch it? It's going to be gone.
And the whole Congress is in rehab. It's a very sad story.
Yeah, it's really right.
Yeah, no, I think they have to work it out a lot earlier, though. The idea that it would come down to the last minute is really what Fitch is talking about. So that the Republicans and the Democrats get together and start working on these numbers, along with the the federal offices, and just not make it a spectacle. It's always at the last minute. I don't think I would give them carte blanche, though. I think there would be, you're right, you said every piece of, pork legislation would be on the table. So I think that's pushing it a little bit, but I do see what Fitch is saying.
Yeah, we've had like David Walker, who used to be Comptroller General of the country, and others, and we've talked about the upcoming Social Security crisis and Medicare crisis if it's not addressed soon, and we're thinking 2032, 2033. Oh, that's 2033. Until all of a sudden you think, well, wait a second, this is 2023. So and politicians, they always want to kick the can down the road. But we had Bill Cassidy on the show about a month and a half, 2 months ago, and he was talking that by 2032. If the Social Security system is not addressed, there'll be a 20% haircut for everybody who gets it. Now, of course, that's the ifs. If it's not addressed, if it's not, so no politician wants to talk about that. But like what you're saying, do you think it's going to wait until December of 2031 before finally they go, oh, we better do something?
No, I think they'll get it together a little bit before that, but it's such a political hot button. It's you cannot run on the idea that I'm going to alter Social Security benefits or Medicare benefits. You just can't say it. So it has to be done at a different level where there's an agreement that you could what you basically got to do, though, is keep feeding the pot faster. And that's really that's what's going to have to do because, that's a matter of raising the budget limit and things like that. But just attacking the benefits, I just can't see any organization being able to run on that. That's going to be very tough.
These are entitlements or things that, Social Security, Medicare, other types of things that the public starts to expect that you paid into, in fairness, that you've paid into throughout all the years, but now you're expecting this to come about. Once you start giving, you can't take it away.
And that's the thing that Fitch was talking about. You can have all the debt you want, basically, when rates are very, very low. And now we're starting to pay the piper because we have a lot of debt, like we did before, but we're not going to be able to pay. Those interest payments are going to be huge for us with interest rates going up. I don't think interest rates are going to go up much longer. I think there might be one or possibly two more increases, but I think we've gone past the very difficult period for the Feds.
Morgan Stanley, I think this week said that they've taken recession off the table for 2023. Well, that's great news. That's wonderful news. I mean, they still kept it as a possibility of 2024. But do you think that recession is now off the table the way things have been handled?
Yeah, I think everybody was wrong. There was no recession. In fact, if you looked at where we stand right now, whether we're worried about a recession or too strong an economy, it's really that the economy is too strong. The job market is too strong, and that's what leads to inflation. So if you got to pick your poison in there, apparently the selection has been to now start to bring the economy back in. But that's going to be tough to do because the job market has been so strong, and real wages have gone up, which has been a real problem for the last 30 years. But you got to remember that the budget deficit has been going up every year, and that's what leads to the total debt. I mean, we haven't had a budget surplus, I believe, since President Clinton was in office in 1993.
The economy will have to grow, I would assume, and maybe help me with this, will have to grow like at a 2.5 to maybe 3%, maybe higher, to always keep ahead of the rate of the deficit of being able to do it. So thank goodness, like you're saying, thank goodness that we're not going into a recession. If we don't go to a recession, I hope not this year, and hopefully not next year. But do you think that we can continue to keep the economy humming maybe at a 3%, 3.5%, if not more?
Well, if you look back, Andre, the average GDP over the last 20 years has been somewhere between an increase in 2.5% to 3%. So we're not far off where it's been. If you wanted to get GDP really going and all the positive things that could happen there, you would have to get more people. We can't grow the economy with the number of people we have. I guess 330 million residents, and that would have to change. But I think it's coming. I'm inherently an optimist. I have a radio show called Out to Lunch, and I bring in entrepreneurs every week, 2 entrepreneurs, and I see. For instance, I'm very optimistic about New Orleans because I see all these people come in, a lot of young people with ideas.
With the new economy, at one time you worked from Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, or something similar to that. You worked at a location, or you went into an office. Well, today that office people are not going into the office and working from home more. And with what we were talking about with the unemployment rate, that employers would just love to have a human employee working, that the employee is somewhat making more of the demands. Well, I'm curious now with office space. People are not going back in the office. Just this week, I think it was Moody's that downgraded the banks, a lot of regional banks. They downgraded, I think, 10 banks because of the fact of worried about loans. Do you think all this ties in together of what we're talking about?
Oh, yeah. And those commercial loans really look like one of the scarier parts of the economy going forward. So I can definitely agree with what they're doing. Of course, the other part about the banks is they're really in kind of a tight spot right now because when interest rates went up, the value of the bonds in those portfolios or the loans have all dropped. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, the amount of interest they have to pay to get depositors in to buy bank CDs, for instance, has gone up. So it's a heads you lose, tails you lose situation. I think that's what Moody's was really talking about. And you talk, particularly young people, they do not want to come back to the office. I talked to a guy running a company the other day, and he was thinking, he said, I'd like to find out where that push is. They, like, offer somebody $60,000 a year to work at home and maybe $72,000 to come in. He was just really curious how much it would take in addition to get people to come to the office. But there is no love of going back into the office.
And that's a very good point, because last week we had Tom Gimbel on the show, who was the CEO of LaSalle Networks, a hiring firm. And that was exactly what we were discussing and talking. And I remember the CEO of Salesforce is asking that if you come back to work into the office, we'll donate to the charity of your choice. And my first thought was, well, why don't you, if I'm the employee, why don't you donate to me? But it's in other words, it's inducers to hopefully get people back. And I think it was the CEO of Morgan Stanley that first months ago said, no, we want you back into the offices of New York and such. And I worry about, as you talk to young people and at Tulane with the Freeman School of Business. Well, how do young people learn but from those who have been around a while to go what to do and what not to do?
I always think, in fact, we always talk to the class about this, the most important thing about a job, particularly those early years, is to find a mentor. And that you can't really do from home. I always make the students laugh by saying that when I was in the investment business, I had a group of little older guys that kind of took me under their wing, and I never knew if they just felt bad for me or they thought I had potential. But to have a mentor and those kind of relationships is invaluable. I don't know how you would eventually get past that.
Coming up, WYES is going to be having a lunch and learn, and it's going to be in 2 weeks, and it's going to be on a Thursday I think at Pat Gallagher's restaurant, and you're going to be the keynote speaker. Now, unlike, I don't know, at your house, if when you talk, I don't know if your wife and kids automatically take notes like they do in a classroom.
I can assure you they don't.
They don't? Okay. Well, I'll be the one writing notes. Okay. Do you any ideas, any thoughts of what are you going to be talking about, like ideas of what you're going to be discussing at Pat Gallagher's and WYES?
I have no idea.
Okay.
I'm only kidding.
So you're the kind of student that the night before that the paper was needed, you're going to be writing it up until 5 a.m. in the morning, right? Okay.
Yes, that is the unfortunate thing. But on this speech, really going to be talking about the big mistakes that investors make. Not diversifying, not having a long-term look at things. I mean, basically, investors are hardwired to blow themselves up. I mean, I know that sounds terrible, but they listen to the news. For instance, the other day when the U.S. debt was downgraded, the market fell really hard for about 3 hours, and then people said, well, that's ridiculous. And then it came right back up again. They've got to look at long-term ideas and long-term goals, and that's going to be really the key. And And asset allocation. That's the other mistake people make. And over long periods of time, stocks outperform just about any other asset class, but they're bumpy. You know, the returns go up and down every year. So over time, you really ought to be weaning yourself to fewer and fewer percentages of stocks and more in bonds. So I think if we just got that across to people, and then we'll talk a little bit about Birkenroad reports and all the terrific companies we found in this region. And you know, a lot of times the best investments are right under your nose, but everybody wants to invest somewhere else, and that's true of any state, but there's a lot of terrific ideas here.
Peter, I hope you come back. I've always enjoyed talking.
Me too. Thanks, Andre.
Thanks, Peter. Hey, we mentioned earlier about a luncheon that Peter's going to be the keynote speaker taking place in a couple of weeks. We're going to give you details about that when we come back toward the end of the show. But first, have you got a question, maybe a comment about the show? We'd love to hear from you. Make it concise, make it pithy, and write us at andre@benacapital.com. But let's take a look at the markets heading into next week. But before we do, on this day, August the 11th in 1897, German chemist Felix Hoffmann created the drug called acetylsalicylic acid. So what is it now called? Well, we've got the answer, and it's coming up. On this day, August the 11th in 1897, German chemist Felix Hoffmann created a drug called acetylsalicylic acid. So what is it now called? Aspirin. Well, in fact, the head of Bayer Pharmaceuticals called the invention worthless and all hot air, but it became the best-selling drug of all time. Now, it may have helped by renaming it aspirin, and I'll tell you a secret, I had to practice saying acetylsalicylic a lot, but it was invented 126 years ago today. And that's a wrap-up on Wall Street Wrap-Up. So with our conversation with Peter, we brought up about an upcoming event on Thursday, August the 24th. WYES is going to be hosting a luncheon learn at Pat Gallagher's, where Peter Ricciuti is going to be the keynote speaker. I'll be there, and I'd love to meet you. And if you do come, go to the WYES.org website and get your reservations in soon. Last time I checked, I think there's still some seats available, but you better do it fast. Join me next week when we'll be talking about writers and actors striking in Hollywood. Well, broadcasters are moving now into sports, and sports is a hot business. My guest next week is the former president of ESPN Sports, Steve Bornstein. Disney, the owner of ESPN, has just partnered with Penn Gaming, and Amazon is buying more rights to the NFL. The future of sports broadcasting, sports betting, cord cutting, and much more, with my guest, the former president of ESPN, Steve Bornstein. That's next week. You don't want to miss it. And that's our show for Friday, August the 11th. Our thanks to Peter Ricciuti for being with us tonight, but always we appreciate you for allowing us into your homes this evening. Have a fun weekend with the ones you love. I'll see you next week. Remember, if it's Friday, it's Wall Street Wrap-Up. I'm Andre Laborde, and remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Wall Street Wrap-Up is supported by Bamboolas, featuring live music and coming soon, tapas and wine upstairs. Bamboolas, the heartbeat of Frenchman Street.